Bowen had a tantrum one day in the middle of Target, and he was laying on the ground, and people stopped and stared. And I stood up and said, he has autism. Anybody have any questions? Why do we judge that which we don't understand? We need to be students of other people so that we can love other people, so that we can show them Christ. I don't want my kids to grow up. I don't want anybody else's kids or somebody that's going to walk into your church and say, I or my sibling was not welcome in your church. Church isn't safe for me. I don't want to worship your God.
Ben, this summer at the Southern Baptist Convention, you received a question from the floor just about curriculum and special needs, children with special needs, how Lifeway can support that.
Yeah, and this passionate customer was the father of a child who really needed a lot of extra help. Mm-hmm. And so what I heard in his voice was a cry for help. We really need some assistance in delivering content to our autistic child. And what was amazing about it is we had just done this interview with the Quillets,
right,
who's on staff here at Lifeway, about their son and the challenges they've had with autism in the church. So this was that question. This was the episode I referred to in the question. So let's roll the question.
Microphone 3B.
My son Anakin is autistic. He's one of 44 children in America that's autistic. My church is 75 or less, which is the average size of the churches in America. I need help having autism inclusion in our curriculums and our resources. So as a dad, I can reach my son for Christ. And as a pastor, I can reach him and other kids for Christ. So maybe it's a question, maybe it's a challenge, but I just would love to see more autism and special needs inclusions in curriculum, resources, and books, please.
Yes, I love it. Proverbs 16 says that a man's gift makes room for him. He will stand before kings. In Old Testament times, when people went to a house, they brought a gift because it showed respect. And if you show respect, doors open for people who show respect. If you will come to the Lifeway store, one of our top content creators has a child with autism. He's an unbelievable leader. His name's Tyler Quillet. We just had him on our Glass House podcast to talk about autism in the church. Please come and see us at the store today. And I want to introduce you to Tyler, and let's get some ideas going on how we can better serve those families. Thank you.
You could hear a lot of emotion in his voice.
Yeah.
That's a tense moment at the SBC anyway. People are coming to the microphones because they have something they're very passionate about. But this question was different for me in that I really felt for him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as a parent too, you hurt when your kids are hurting. And so that was one of the questions that people said, did that upset you? And I thought, no, he's just passionate. I mean, he needs something for his child, and we have the ability to provide it. So, how can we do that?
And the Glass House, what I love about these conversations is it helps me understand people also and empathize with them. Mm-hmm. So having just had this conversation with the Quillets, it was easier for me to understand why it was so hard for him to take his child to church and why he needed a little extra grace. So this conversation was helpful.
But I also want to point out that he came to the booth, to the Lifeway booth. He was able to meet Tyler, but also we were able to point him to resources that are there. That's what's so hard, is that people don't know sometimes the resources that are available for them. And so we were able to say, have you considered using this? And it worked. I mean, it can work for them.
So if you're out there and this is your family story and autism has been an unexpected challenge that you have faced, I pray that this conversation would bless you and help you feel a little less alone in it. We are excited to have these special guests with us today. We have Tyler and Cathie Quillet. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us.
So good to be here.
So real quick, Tyler, tell them what you do, and then I'm going to have Cathie do the same thing.
Yep. So I am the team leader here at Lifeway for our short-term Bible studies team. So we create everything, small groups, and yeah.
Awesome. And Cathie, this is our first time meeting you, but we're so excited to meet you, and what you do is awesome. So talk about it.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I own both Tennessee Reproductive Therapy and Arkansas Reproductive Therapy.
I'm from
We
Arkansas.
specialize in the treatment of infertility, pregnancy loss, pregnancy, postpartum, and adoption, and walking individuals and couples through those life stages.
Amazing. Well, we at this new space have the opportunity to have coffee now. And Tyler and I got to sit down recently and have some coffee, and I was asking him one of my favorite questions, which is, what do you do for fun? And out of that, you spun into some of your guys' story of having a child with autism and how that actually makes finding personal me time very challenging.
Very.
Right.
And the more we talked, I came home and I was like, Lynley, I think we have a topic here.
Well, no, you came home and were telling me about it, and I said, I think this would be such a great podcast because it's very specific. And similar to, we did a podcast recently, not just on mental illness, but specifically bipolar. And I thought this would be so helpful to have not broad spectrum special needs, but autism. Like, talk to us about that. So, I mean, the thing that Ben and I love doing these podcasts for is that there's topics on here that we're very ignorant about. And autism is one of those. We don't have a child with autism, we don't have anyone in my family or his family. And so we just really want to learn from you. And we hope that the audience can learn from you as well.
So why don't you guys start with your family story? Tell us about your kids and each of them and how the Lord brought them into your life, all that.
Yeah, that could be a whole podcast.
Yeah,
We'll
maybe
keep
in
that,
5 minutes
Yeah,
or
we'll
less.
keep that really short here. So through years of infertility, we chose to adopt from Ethiopia. And we brought 2 boys home. And our oldest son, Silas, is 11, and our youngest is Bowen, and he's 10. And Bowen has autism. And from the beginning, we knew that Bowen was up against it when we first met him, when we brought him home. But we were quite sure that it was going to be on the physical side of things. We believe that he was born very early. He was left abandoned in the road right near birth, and he had a lot of physical challenges initially. And so we kind of always saw that like, he's going to struggle in some capacity probably for a while physically. Little did we know that over the years we would come to find that his autism was really deprivational autism of what his brain was deprived of in those first years, really formative years, where he just wasn't able to grow in the way that he needed to.
So just a little bit more specifically to talk about Bowen was what he was really up against. He was probably born about 28 weeks gestation. So think of a baby born in America. That baby is going to be in the NICU for like 8 to 10 weeks. And within a week of Bowen's birth, at 28-ish weeks gestation, he was abandoned on the side of the road in Ethiopia to die. And somebody found him in an orphanage, or somebody found him on the side of the road and took him to an orphanage. And he was left he was left in a car seat most of those months. So when we learned about Bowen's life at 4 months old, Bowen weighed 9 pounds. Babies are born at that size. When we brought him home at 9 months, he weighed 11 pounds.
Wow.
And he could not sit up. He could not move.
He had not met a developmental milestone yet.
Yeah, he
Wow.
literally couldn't move at 10 months. Like he just kind of limp noodle. And within a few weeks of being home, he was moving, he was sitting up, he was crawling. Like we kind of cut him loose and that stuff came. But yeah, when we brought him home, he was very sickly.
Bowen also had moderate to severe hearing loss. And so he heard for a long time like he was underwater, the doctor said. And then we did tubes, and then he started communicating like he was underwater. So we knew that the tubes were unsuccessful. And so all that to say, like, Bowen's been up against it his entire life. But what I love is both the boys' Ethiopian names are their middle names, and Bowen's given name at birth was Emmanuel. And so...
And he was born the day after Christmas.
Yeah. And so for us, we feel like, I think a lot of people will look at us and be like, I'm so sorry, your child has, special needs, has autism. He also has a secondary diagnosis of sensory processing disorder. But being Bowen's parents means that we have a front row seat to every miracle that he's ever overcome. And he did. At 10, the other day, he learned how to ride his bike without training wheels.
Oh,
Yeah. And so even little things like that,
yeah.
that most parents are experiencing 6 years before that. We're getting things like riding a bike for the first time this week. And it was the coolest thing as a parent to see that.
So when you went through the adoption process, were you in pastoral ministry at that time?
Yes.
Okay, so explain that a little bit. Like, where were you, or how did you decide to adopt? Was the church supportive? All those things.
Yeah, so we were at a church in Northwest Ohio, a very large church for the community we were in, a community of 8,000 people, and we were a church of probably around 700. So
Wow.
very large for the amount of people around. Super supportive church. I actually grew up in the church. They hired me out of college, and so this was my family since I was born. And so very supportive of us financially, praying for us, just there for us. And it was a really, I almost said easy process. It wasn't an easy process.
It was not an
we
easy
were very,
process.
we were very supported though, which made it so much better. And it was a very difficult process. So as I said earlier, so many miscarriages and the infertility led us to that place. It's still where we felt God was saying, go to Ethiopia. And so we felt very called there.
My prayer all along through all the infertility, all the diagnosis of infertility was mine. And my prayer all along was, God, knock me up and make it stick. I was real specific and you had to stick in those parameters because I kept getting pregnant and kept losing them.
Hold on, I've never heard that prayer before. Knock me up and make it stick.
Totally. I was specific.
After a while, you just get right down.
Yeah, there were no
Get right
more
down.
pleasantries. It was just desperation, and that was like my Hail Mary to the end zone. Like that's what I needed, almost in order to survive. It felt like at that point. And then my prayer became like, God, what do you want my family to look like? And that picture that I always had imagined of like Tyler and I with kids that looked like us perfectly, like just felt like it melted away. And it was like, okay, God, like, what do you want for my family? And it was then that he just broke our hearts. And I think for a lot of people, they were like, okay, so so adoption felt like plan B. Like it wasn't our first thought because we thought like we're going to get married and have kids. Like we've been singing that song since elementary school. Like first comes love, then comes marriage, then you fly to Ethiopia and get your children. Like it was kind of outside of what felt normal to us, but God answered our, we talk so often when we're waiting about prayers being unanswered and where's God, but we found out through some math that we did a little bit later that our oldest son would have been conceived in Ethiopia 2 years before we learned about him, the same month that we had our first miscarriage. And so in the absence and our desperation, God was answering our prayer, and we wouldn't have figured it out for 2 years. And now we have the privilege of raising him.
Wow. I feel like we could do about 4 different episodes here with
I know,
them.
look, we're
there's adoption, there's miscarriage, there's autism, there's special needs ministry. There's so much to cover here. Let's zone in a little bit on autism because obviously you described the physical challenges Bowen had, but then it became clear that he was also going to face mental challenges. And then as a pastor, you're trying to lead a church while at the same time this volatile situation, learning how to care for a child with autism, it had to be very stressful. What did you guys learn through all that? Or just maybe help us understand what is autism?
Autism is a neurological disorder. We don't understand 100% where it comes from. Autism experts still have, 10 years ago, we thought it came from vaccines, and now we're thinking it comes from, there's probably some biological roots. There could be some environmental. It could be because of mom's gestational age, which, that makes me uncomfortable. But all that could be a possibility. And so we're still 100% unsure. But what we do know is that it faces a lot of children face that, and a lot of families struggle with it. And so when Bowen was diagnosed, we weren't surprised. He was diagnosed at 3, and at 2, he had already been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. And so what we noticed really early on was the stimming. So think bodily stimulation. So Bowen's a rocker, and he's a moaner, and he has echolalia. So echolalia also is his verbal processing out loud of things that we are completely unaware of what's going on. So Bowen a lot of times will process his day out loud, not knowing that he's speaking out loud. And so
it's just a lot of like laying his head back. Like he'll just lay and rock like this and just talk out loud. And a lot of times it's just repeating the same thing over and over again. And he's got things that he'll say now that he was repeating over and over again when he was 3 or 4.
Wow.
And he can do that for hours if you let him. And so that's...
How do you handle that? I mean,
that's Bowen's way to calm himself down.
Really
so you just let him go.
you interrupt that, and you might as well just went and poked a bear sometimes.
Okay.
I mean, it's very
Interesting.
he can get very upset by that, and he really does need it. And so there is also a certain point where you're like, okay, you've been doing this for a long time. Let's try and shift some focus and do something. But a lot of times, that's just his way of. It's no different than if somebody comes home after a long day of work and just needs to flip on the TV for a little bit, or it's just his way of calming down, relaxing, and that's kind of just become a norm in our home for him.
Can you tell me, recently we were talking to someone, and I know there was the term Asperger's, but they said that is no longer term. So, I mean, kind of explain that.
So we have a diagnostic manual in the world of psychology. It's called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's the 5th edition. The 4th edition, we diagnosed Asperger's, but we've now taken that out and we just call it an autism spectrum disorder, or ASD.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking from a pastoral perspective, and there's so many different ways we could go with this, but church happens on time, and there's a schedule. And I can only imagine Bowen's in one of those moments where he needs some time, and it's not under your control, and yet you've got to get this kid to church, or you've got to show up to church. How did you guys handle the demands of leading a church while having that unpredictable element in your life?
It was really hard on us, but I don't think I didn't understand it until I was out of full-time ministry, how hard it was on her, because I would leave at 6:30 in the morning on Sunday, and I would come home at, say, 1 o'clock, and she had to get the kids ready, and she had to get them there on time, and she had to go through that whole process without me, and oftentimes, and really all the time, keeping that from me in a sense, like not making me feel guilty that I wasn't home, but she was going through some really tough mornings, where it would have been 10 times easier to just stay home.
I think prior to parenthood, I was really involved. I was a youth leader. I had small groups. We did activities. I was involved in the women's ministry. I co-taught some of the women's ministry. And then it got to the point of parenthood. And for a while, I could get to church. And we could do all of that stuff. And then Bowen got really there were some struggles until we really learned how to regulate Bowen and allowed Bowen to regulate himself, where sometimes we just wouldn't go to church. I thought my role as a pastor's wife at that point, because I couldn't serve, but was to serve my husband by just releasing him to go. And sometimes getting the kids, especially Bowen, to church was something we just couldn't do. It wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth me sitting outside the children's ministry while he stemmed, and honestly, while I was stared at with him, so that our other child could go.
So for people listening to this who are in their church experience, there's a mother outside with her child, what is the most helpful thing for them to do besides to stare at you and maybe make you feel uncomfortable?
That's a good question.
1/3 of special needs families say that they've left a church because they weren't seen or welcomed, or there wasn't a ministry for them. If somebody had a neurotypical child out there, you would say, "Hey, Mama, do you need anything? How you doing? Like, tell me about your child." But there's something about special needs where it's like, I don't understand you. I mean, from a really early age, we group ourselves as humans. We find people with similar interests. We call them cliques, which has a negative connotation. And that it's still so present in the church, where I felt for a long time like, here's the fertile people. So as an infertile person, I have to stay over here. Do you know what I mean? And so I think we see somebody that we don't understand and think, I don't know how to relate to them, so I'm just going to pretend that they're not there. But it would if you just said like, "Hey, Mama, like, you're doing a great job."
And somebody did that to you once.
I
remember you coming home and being like so overwhelmed.
Well,
somebody just saw me.
We were in a Mexican restaurant, and Bowen threw a huge tantrum because we told him that he couldn't have soda. And so it was worth throwing his food all over the ground, screaming, whatever. And so we just bend down and we tend to him because I don't care who stares at me. And everybody in the restaurant stopped, and like even some people stood up to stare at us. And I went over to throw away some trash, and a woman intercepted me and said, "Look at me. Ignore everybody else. I see you. You're doing a great job. Just stand here until you're regulated, and then keep walking. But just pretend that you know me." And it was honestly the first time that I had felt okay just to be Bowen's mom. Like, he has a pulse. He was created in his mother's womb. He is loved beyond measure. He has a spot in glory. But for some reason, we see his disability and think, that's too much for me. And so by very nature, as Bowen's mom, like, there have been times in ministry where I just told Tyler, like, I don't feel safe here. You go. You go. Because by very nature of our job descriptions, you have to be there. If I'm going to love and honor and respect you, I get to send you. But today I can't handle stairs. Today I can't handle misunderstandings. But what that turned to on the other side was, psst, why isn't Cathie coming to church anymore?
Yeah.
Why aren't you helping? Why aren't you serving? And so it's this push and pull as a pastor's wife of like, I should. I hate the word should, but like I should. But it's not only terrible for me. Bowen's not dumb. Children with autism, like, it is a communicative disorder. Like, they know sometimes what's going on. They can reflect back. They just can't get out their feelings. And so they can see stairs. They can perceive all of that. They can feel it. But they don't have maybe the emotional verbiage or the emotional maybe intelligence, what we'd call it anymore, to be able to say, like, I felt sad when that person was staring at me. How that comes out in our home is I'm going to hit dad until I feel regulated.
I've got the scars to prove it. I do want to just backtrack just a little bit, going back to like what is autism, because I don't want anybody to hear this and say like, oh, well, all kids with autism deal with it in the way that Bo does. Really, autism is an umbrella, and so many kids fall under this umbrella that each child is so different. And so while Bowen may need to regulate himself by rocking or the echolalia, and there's regular outburst. Another kid with autism, and I hear this all the time, I can't believe people still go there, but like, is your son like Rain Man? Like, no, my son's not like Rain Man. But there are a number of children with autism who they are smart beyond measure.
And can communicate.
Just nonverbal?
Maybe a little bit nonverbal, maybe just the way we would just say is just kind of awkward in how they present themselves or how they communicate. But autism it's so different in how they learn, how they communicate. And so I just don't want anybody to feel like this is autism.
Yeah.
If everybody with autism is different. And so this is our story, and many will be able to resonate with that and say like, oh, that's ours too. But many will say, that's not our story of autism.
So I'm thinking of a couple people in our kids ministry that had some behavioral challenges, but I don't know if the child had autism or not. Like, it feels easier on my end if the parents would say, hey, I just need you to know that this is the form of autism he has. But is that hard on you, on the parent, because you don't want the child to be labeled? Like, does that make sense? Does my question make sense?
I don't even think it's saying like a form of autism. I think it's we would love it for people to come to us and say like, tell me about your kid.
Okay, so that's the better question.
Yeah, just tell me what's different about him. How does he relate? How does he communicate? How could I best do blank for him? And that's, gosh, that is all we want to hear as parents is tell me about your kid. And we are happy to say, here's what he likes. Here's what he doesn't like. Here's how you can best serve him. And we've had the opportunity to do that here at our church. And they are so interested in Bowen. How do we best serve Bowen? And we've so appreciated that.
But right, when somebody walks into our door with youth group or children's ministry at all, we want to find something that connects us to them. Everybody wants that connection. And so if they're wearing like a Golden State Warriors shirt, you're going to be like, hey, buddy, tell me what you like about the Warriors. Or you see them going and playing Legos, like, do you play Legos at home? Right? Somebody that walks in like a Bowen, first of all, I think it's our responsibility as parents to like warn you, because if we just like throw Bowen into your ministry and you don't know how to love him, I'm setting everybody up for failure, right? So I think it's a parent's responsibility But if there's any difficulty, like let's say ADHD, or you notice chronic allergies, or they have a broken arm and a cast makes it really obvious, like, hey, tell me how to love on your kid today. Like, how are they walking into this space? And that could be for neurotypical kids, non-neurotypical kids. Like, what kind of night did they have? What are they, like, how can I love your child? And I know that becomes really difficult the bigger the group. But I think if somebody just wants to know Bowen specifically, and just, like, I noticed that Bowen really likes to do this. Tell us about him. Like, I will tell you everything about him. As long as you don't pigeonhole him, right? As long as you don't see, which I think is really natural. I even spoke with somebody the other day, and they were like, I'm so scared that my daughter could have autism. That might, that ruins the rest of their entire life. Pivot. That doesn't ruin their entirety of their life. Like, it's going to look different. But part of parenthood is pivoting and evolving with our kids. Like, who they are at 2 isn't who they are at 18. So let's grow with them.
And each kid is different anyway. You guys have 4 neurotypical kids, and you parent each of those 4 kids differently. And so we're just doing that. It's on a different level. We're just parenting differently with our different kids.
Talk to us a little bit about how comforting it is when you enter into an environment and there's somebody there that knows and understands and is ready to receive your family. Like, I can only imagine when you visit a church and there's somebody ready who knows the language, knows the verbiage, knows the challenges. How does that feel for you guys?
I was a pastor at a large church. We had a special needs ministry at the time. And so Bowen had a place to go sometimes, most of the time, when he was wanting to. So then the second church that we've attended here in Tennessee, I was an elder, and it was a smaller church. And there weren't the resources for Bowen that we had before. And now at a new church, we're just lay people, and I have no leadership responsibilities. And there is a thriving special needs ministry for Bowen, one that he can go into the regular children's class, and when he needs, he can step out and go to a sensory room. And that is huge for him to just kind of choose. Here's how I'm feeling today. Here's where I need to go. And so that's been really helpful for us to have that. But we've been able to see this in so many different ways, different types of special needs ministries and in different roles for me.
But I think before we even make a transition to church, a lot of people will go onto a website and say, like, what's the music look like? What's the pastor look like? What's the statement of faith? And for us, we have to see if there's a special needs ministry. That's the first gatekeeper. If there's not a special needs ministry, there's not something for every member of our family. And that is the first disqualifier. And so once we find a church with a special needs ministry, then we check into statement of faith and do they align with what we see as truth? And so it is a little bit harder, where a lot of people might think, we live here in the Bible Belt, people might think like, oh, there's 100 churches, where when we've looked, our search was narrowed to 3. And so we have to find the one that best suits us, and again, meets every member of our family. Because if not every member is safe there, emotionally safe there, has somebody to love them there, like, we could invest, but if there's not something for Bowen, it means one of us has to stay home with Bowen.
And I read this week a stat that came from Lifeway Research a couple of years ago that 99% of churches, the leadership would say, we are welcoming to special needs. That's not true, though. And I think they believe that. Many of them believe that and say, well, sure, we're welcoming. But welcoming would be, we would greet you with a handshake and a smile and say, welcome to our church. And that's about the extent of it. So, like, basically they're saying, we have a good attitude towards you, but we can't give you anything beyond that. And so it is certainly much less than 99%. And so I think a lot of those in church leadership, to be able to say, what can we do just beyond saying we welcome them? How can we best serve these families and these people?
99% of pastors might think they're doing a great job. 99% of special needs parents are going to walk away from those churches. That was my number 99. That's not real research. But I've left churches crying. We've tried out churches, and I've wondered why my son is left in a cinder block room unattended, because that was their special needs ministry. We've walked away feeling like, because there's nothing for my kid, like I just go sit in the lobby while people pass me by going to the bathroom, never asking if I'm okay. Like, people might think that they have something for our son or for other autism buddies at large. But unless there's a safe place to be and a place where people like know us and know how to meet Bowen's needs, those churches are not a welcoming space.
Tyler, you sent an article from Lifeway Research about this topic. And I thought a line was so good in there. It says, having a community where you don't have to actively advocate for your child and your child is seen as valuable at the start can bring such peace and joy, because it's just referring to the fact that for all organizations, school, all week long, you're having to advocate for them. And so to go somewhere where you feel safe would be so peaceful. So, I mean, I think that's what you're saying. Churches think they do that, but maybe don't do it as well as they think they do.
And I think it's from that same article. Andrew Whitehead, who's a professor at Clemson, said, Christ said, let the children come to me. If children with autism and other conditions are systematically attending at much lower rates, then perhaps our religious organizations are limiting which children can come to Christ.
That's really good. So one of the questions we like to ask around these kinds of subjects is, what do you wish the average person knew? Or what are some things that you wish you could help people understand so that they could at least attempt to empathize?
This sounds a little bit brash, but like Bowen is a human being.
Mm-hmm. That's where I went first.
Bowen is a kid, just like your kids, every kid. Bowen communicates differently. Bowen may be sitting on the floor crying. But just because we see that doesn't, and I know people's hearts are in the right place. I really do. But they don't know what to do and they're scared. And so they walk away or they walk past and they don't do anything. So I would just say, approach a Bowen, whoever that is in your life, in your church, wherever, like you would any other kid if a kid fell down and was hurt and crying and they were sitting alone, every one of us, I think, would go to them like, where's your mom and dad? How can I help you? What do you need? But we see a child with autism who's maybe losing his mind a little bit in the hallway, and we walk past because that's awkward, and so we don't do anything. So I would just say, look at Bowen like you would look at any child with autism, special needs, like you would look at any other child. It's not awkward, and maybe it feels awkward, but that's going to go away pretty quick when you begin to have that relationship, and it's like, oh, they're no different. They're emotional right now. That's it. That's
really good. I feel convicted about that because I mean, when you don't understand something, you ignore it.
And we judge that which we don't understand. Yes. Like, I don't understand your lifestyle, and so your lifestyle is weird or wrong. No, Bowen has a neurological condition. It is a diagnosable. Insurance covers it. And if insurance covers it, that means that it's real, right? Bowen's in a little baseball league where they get a buddy, and it's just for kids with special needs. There are walkers, there are wheelchairs, there's a blind child. And a woman from our small group went this last weekend, and she was moved to tears just because of the community outreach and just how beautiful it was. And she said, Kath, why don't people know that this exists? And I said, because people don't want to know that families like this exist. It is not just a church issue. It is a global issue. I mean, we have had to fight for years for Bowen to be seen at school, for him to be valued at school, for him to be seen as equal at school. There's government rules and mandates that have to be met, and Bowen's humanity isn't always seen there. And at church, in the community, I mean, there are places that our family won't go. I think you and I we and your family live in the same county. Mm-hmm. There are people that we will not take Bowen that you would freely take your children because of how they will be seen. Now, it's not just because we want to protect Bowen. It's because we have a neurotypical child who is intelligent, who's older than him, and who sees people's reaction. There is a really big gym in our town, and we went there swimming with a friend once, and Bowen left stimming going, ah. And as I'm carrying him out, he's crying. My other son is saying, oh, Mama, what do I do? And some man comes up to us and mocks Bowen to my face going, ah. Like, there are still places that we cannot take our children because of how they will be perceived. And it's not like we can take it. You judge my kid. Bowen had a tantrum one day in the middle of Target, and he was laying on the ground, and people stopped and stared. And I stood up and said, he has autism. Anybody have any questions?
That's actually a really good response.
What did they do?
They walked away. But why do we judge that which we don't understand? We need to be students of other people so that we can love other people, so that we can show them Christ. I don't want my kids to grow up. I don't want anybody else's kids or somebody that's going to walk into your church who, who's listening, and say, I or my sibling was not welcome in your church. Church isn't safe for me. I don't want to worship your God. That is where we're going to get generationally. If we cannot meet the needs of these people, church is not going to be a safe place.
And autism, the number of children with autism is only growing. It's now 1 in 36. And it wasn't that long ago that it was 1 in hundreds. And so that is going to continue to grow. So the church has to catch up. It has to. And Cathie just mentioned this baseball league that Bowen's in. It is the model for how I wish every church would do special needs, would serve those kids with autism. They bring in local baseball teams, junior varsity and varsity baseball and softball teams. So you've got teenage kids coming. They pair up with every kid with special needs. Every kid bats every inning. Every kid scores every inning.
And you have to clap. You have to clap for every kid.
Parents are not allowed to be a part of the game. They have to sit in the crowd and just enjoy their child. And none of these teenagers have any training on special needs at all. Their job is to go love on these kids with special needs, and they crush it. And parents are allowed to sit back and enjoy the game.
That's really cool.
And if the church could get to that place of we don't have to be experts, but we are going to learn how to love the heck out of those kids and allow parents to attend worship, serve in children's ministry, whatever it may be. But if we can get to that place as a church, we don't have to be experts. We just gotta learn to love them, and that can happen. We can get there.
Why do you think? So I have a niece in a wheelchair. I've walked beside her mom as we're walking through a mall. Why do you think people eye dart and they won't make eye contact? Because if I was walking through with my kids, people would be like, "Oh, cute kids," or whatever. They'll just say something. So why do you? I mean, you said that earlier, we judge what we don't know. But how can we quit the eye darting? Quit the avoidance, walking around. I mean, even what you said as a director of kids ministry, there have been times where there's been a child in the hallway and I would stop to say, how are you doing? Then we had a special buddies ministry. And I mean, even myself, there was times where the buddy would be out there with them and I didn't do the same. I didn't respond the same as I would have. And so I'm like, why do we do that? You can be honest with me.
We're breaking generational issues, right? I mean, things that we were told by our grandparents or our parents and how we are reared. I think we're probably doing better than we were in the past generation. But I still think, we live in the South, right? People are welcome if they're the same religion, if they're the same socioeconomic class, if they look like us, if they act like us, if they spend their money like us, right? And again, I think it's a level of ignorance that we just don't understand. Now, I will be honest, I didn't either. Mm-hmm. And then you're on the receiving end and it feels like, why do you see my child as any different than me? If somebody were just to say, hey, bud, get down, bend down, crouch down, make eye contact, they might not understand you. But what it shows is human dignity, right? To bend down and say, hey, bud, don't know how my kid is. And some people like bend down and give him a high five, and he'll turn away and I'll be like, I'm sorry, he has autism. And they'll be like, oh, that's fine, no big deal. But some people, the eye darting, I don't know why we do it. Maybe it's our own discomfort. I don't know that it is always judgment, and I don't always receive it as judgment. But if I were walking with our older son, who is neurotypical, if we're walking through a mall and we see somebody coming, I would say, like, buddy, I need you to make eye contact with that kid over there. They're in a wheelchair. If you have any questions, you can ask me once we pass, but I need you to treat them like a human being. So that he can bend down and say, hey, how are you? Whatever. If it's a new student in his class, whatever. Like, you be the person that goes up to that person, and maybe you're the only person that treats them with human dignity in an entire day. And for some of these buddies, in an entire week. But that impact, think of the kid who sits alone, who nobody sees, nobody wants to understand. One person that says, hey, how are you? I see you, could change the trajectory of how they view themselves. I mean, as a therapist, I hear those moments where that's broken for people. Like, we might think, like, my self-esteem is busted. Well, where does that go? Where do you trace that? Where's that root system? And we can find that root system. And what if, even if it's for our neurotypical child or our child with autism, like, for somebody to say, I see you, that breaks something potentially generational that could affect them for years to come.
As we close, what would you say to the parents out there who are listening, really in a dark place, need some encouragement?
I would say, like, mama to mama, parent to parent, like, it feels like you're alone, but you're not. It feels like the days are really long, and sometimes progress feels really distant, and maybe you're fighting a fight that nobody sees or appreciates or understands. And I would say that we get that. But you're doing a good job. If I could be like the person who stopped me in that Mexican restaurant and say, like, I see you. You're doing a great job. The journey is long, but the journey is worth it. And fight for community, and don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. This is a marathon for us. Like, our friends are talking about retirement, and we're thinking we're going to launch one and not launch the other. And so the journey is long, but just don't lose heart, and don't walk away from the Father. Don't walk away from the Father.
And I just take that one step further from the parents who are raising a child with autism to the family and friends and those who are in community with that family is just continue to love them, continue to encircle them, pour into them, and be that foundation that they need. Be a shoulder to cry on, be an ear to listen to. And so I just want to encourage them too, because that is also, as we talked about, for so many people who are like, this is awkward, I don't know what to do. It can still be awkward even if you're you're the uncle or you're a grandparent. But really auger in there and support and love on.
And then don't stop.
Yeah. This is, again, as Cathie said, this is for the long term. This isn't going to go away. And so this is for a long time.
Those parents need a lot of encouragement.
Yeah. Commit for the long haul.
So what would you say, as we close, to ministry leaders out there who are listening to this? What's a word of encouragement to them?
I think there's two answers to this. There's the ministry leader who is at a church that has a lot of resources that can pour into a special needs ministry, and there is the church that does not have those resources. And so I would say, if you have those resources, take full advantage of those and use them as much as you can for these families. If you don't have those resources, learn how you can do it without having to have some big grandiose special needs room. Learn from, maybe go to the local school system and find out from the special needs director of that school, like, how can I best serve these families? What do these kids need? And again, this is just learn about these special needs in a broad sense, but then get to know the people in a really deep sense personally, and how you can serve them, how your church can serve them, how you might be able to whether it's yourself, your spouse, your leadership team, how when that family walks in, you've got it set up so that mom and dad can just go into worship, and you've got the kids. They don't need to go to some special room or anything like that. You've got them, and mom and dad can just peacefully go and sit. So just learn ways that you can serve those families well.
I would say see the next one that walks into your church, the next person in a wheelchair or that's stimming or something that walks in your building. Get on the kid's level and say, hey, bud, and then stand up and look at the mom and the dad in the eyes and say, how are you?
That's huge. Yeah, get down on a knee.
And then start a conversation and ask questions. I don't think everybody has to be an expert on autism, but everybody can participate in the conversation.
That's really helpful.
The Glass House is brought to you by Lifeway, producer and editor Angie Elkins, with help from William Hall. Sound engineer Donnie Gordon, art by Heather Berksinski, and photography by Rebecca McVeigh.